when you get triggered and activated and you feel all that rage boil up, it's not just that one incident from the current moment that is the fuel behind that rage. It's decades of similar experiences through that cognitive bias that lead to this rage. Now, what is a child going to do with themselves, their sense of self, when they feel like their emotions are wrong? The ability for someone to sit with you is crucial to our sense of self, that we matter, that we belong. And when we don't get that experience, we experience our emotions as being wrong. They'll never understand the excruciating experience of growing up with an abusive parent. My spouse, my friend, they'll never understand me because they didn't have that exact experience. Most people think procrastination is just about time management. But if that were true, it would show up everywhere. And it doesn't. It shows up around very specific things that matter the most. So procrastination isn't random. You don't delay neutral tasks. You delay things that come with risk, specifically emotional risk. It's not the task you're avoiding, it's what that task might say about you. I experienced this personally when I was trying to complete my first book, and the amount of inertia that I felt, the amount of immovability that I felt was overwhelming. And it was quite surprising to me, actually, because sure, I procrastinate a bit on certain tasks, but I never felt such an overwhelming sense of fear and dread, which essentially froze me from moving forward in the way that I wanted. Other examples of where procrastination might show up is sending an email. Maybe it's an email that asks for a meeting with your boss to eventually ask for a raise. Or it's an email that involves some sort of confrontation, setting a boundary. Email asking for a time to talk with a friend to perhaps bridge some sort of reconciliation. Other examples where procrastination shows up, similar to my book, are starting tasks that you really care about, like a pet project, something near and dear to your heart, something you've always dreamt of doing, and now you're actually thinking about taking steps to approach that dream. That's huge. It's nothing to be taken lightly. Another example of procrastination is saying how you actually feel. Well, I want to tell this person how I feel about them, good or bad, but maybe not today. Maybe I'll just do it next week. Putting off maybe a big talk that you've been wanting to have with your partner, your boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, where there's something that's been bothering you, or you want to have a serious talk about the relationship. So you push that off as well. Procrastination shows up once again. So what's really at stake here? And what we're talking about is that mistakes, and you can ask yourself, what is your relationship with mistakes? Mistakes for some feel survivable. They're not pleasant to sit with or acknowledge, but they're survivable, right? For others, mistakes may feel like a verdict, a conclusion, a condemnation about who you are as a person. Being able to accept feedback, being able to sit with mistakes and not let it crumble your sense of self is a huge indicator of where you are on the self-esteem spectrum, we can call it, where you are with your relationship with yourself, your sense of self. It's important to note that high-functioning people can still have very fragile self-esteem, very tenuous sense of self. And so what does this, we'll call it inner collapse, what could this inner collapse look like? Let's take a situation where I messed up. Okay. That can stay a lesson learned. It can stay very surfacey. It can not ruin your day or ruin your week. I messed up. If not processed in a nurturing way, if not processed in a very healthy way, can quickly turn into, there's something wrong with me. I messed up, then equals there's something wrong with me. I am not good enough. I made a mistake. I am a mistake. Another example is I expressed a need to my partner and they didn't meet it. My needs are too much. Every time I ask for a need, it's just too much. I'm too needy. I'm too clingy. I have hopeless abandonment issues. All is lost. So in all of this, over the years, over the decades really, The system learns to avoid situations that trigger that inner collapse. Your system, you learn very deftly how to avoid situations that are going to threaten that sense of self, that are going to threaten that inner collapse or threaten to trigger off that inner collapse. When we take a closer look at self-esteem is not just confidence. It's not your successes in life, how many master's degrees you have, the job you have, how much money you make, do you have a house, car, family, kids, all of it. That is not self-esteem, and that will not help your self-esteem. It might boost your confidence a little bit, but that is not the heart of self-esteem. It's not how you feel when things are going well. Also, not a time to assess accurately what your sense of self is. It's not how much success you have. Self-esteem is what happens inside of you when something goes wrong. What do you have to bounce back on? What is your resilience? The root of self-esteem is emotional attunement. Now, what do I mean by emotional attunement? Attunement is attuning to someone, tuning in, being on the same wavelength, the same channel, noticing someone is upset and caring enough to say, hey, I notice that you're feeling upset. What's going on? Are you okay? So you're attuning to how they're feeling, and they start sharing how they're feeling, and now you're getting down in the weeds with them. You're sitting in that hole with them to try to understand them. You're putting yourself in their shoes, to walk a day in their shoes so that you can feel how they're feeling. You can empathize. This is the essence of empathy. Empathy, the definition of empathy, is the ability to be affected by someone else's pain. Do you care that someone else is affected? Can you relate to how they're affected? Now, a lot of times I'll hear, oh, my partner is not empathetic. They will never understand the pain of breaking my leg, being out of work for what turned out to be a year. They'll never understand the excruciating experience of growing up with an abusive parent. My spouse, my friend, they'll never understand me because they didn't have that exact experience. Having the exact experience is not a precursor for empathy. Someone can still empathize with you, even though they themselves haven't specifically experienced that. What they're saying to you is that you're upset and you matter. The fact that you're upset makes me want to help you. I want to understand you. You're not crazy for feeling upset. I can totally understand why you feel upset. If I were you, I would feel the exact same way. In fact, I've had similar experiences, and I can totally relate. You're not crazy for feeling the way you do. When we have this experience of other people noticing when we're upset, and they tune in, it gives us the sense that we matter. Without that emotional attunement, we're left as children to navigate this whole wild experience of having big emotions and not knowing what to do with them. When you have big emotions, well, think about it when you were growing up. When you had big emotions, when you had upsetting situations, when you expressed some sort of differing opinion from your parents, or when you expressed you were sad or depressed or down, what was their response? A lot of times, most of the time, children are given experiences where the parent means well, perhaps, and they want the child to feel better, so they'll say something like, "It's not that bad. You'll get over this quickly. It's okay. Just go watch some TV. How can I make this better?" And by jumping to solutions really quickly, and this is something that shows up more in people with avoidant attachment traits, whether it's fearful avoidant, dismissive avoidant, people who tend to lean and jump towards solutions are generally people who don't like to sit with feelings. And I say this personally because I have spent many years in IT, totally grew up with a left brain approach to life. Logic and analysis is one of my main coping mechanisms. I don't so much like to sit in emotions. I have forced myself and trained myself to now sit with feelings and sit with other people's feelings. And it took years to get to this place because it was such a protection mechanism for me to say like, feelings, no, let's just analyze it. Let's just find the neat solution that will get us out of this tricky situation or this painful situation. So the ability for someone to sit with you is crucial to our sense of self, that we matter, that we belong. And when we don't get that experience, we experience our emotions as being wrong. Now, what is a child going to do with themselves, their sense of self, when they feel like their emotions are wrong? You're too much. You're a brat. You are too emotional. What's wrong with you? When I was growing up, and by the way, both of my parents have passed many years ago. I have nothing but gratitude and love for them, for the childhood that I had. And I also had experiences where emotional attunement was not practiced very much in our house. Not to any fault of my parents. We need to be taught everything that we know, and they were never taught how to process feelings, how to talk about feelings, how to express feelings in a healthy, productive way, how to resolve conflict while acknowledging feelings. It was more of a stick your head in the sand when there was conflict. It was God says, don't let the sun go down in your anger. It was you say you're sorry to your brother. There were many years, the period where I fought very much with one of my brothers. Hi, Mike. Don't let the sun go down in your anger. You will say, I'm sorry. I don't care if you don't feel it. You just white knuckle it and go through the motions. And then my mom could sleep peacefully at night. I'm assuming, I don't know. But the problem with that is on the surface, it keeps things peaceful. We don't really talk about things. We just joke about it, like making a joke. We just like wait for time to pass and then we watch some TV and then all is good. It's all good. Let's just move forward. We don't need to sit in the weeds of what happened and relive everything and potentially bring up another argument. The problem with that approach is biological. It can be explained biologically. When we talk about neurobiology and the neurobiology of a trigger, more specifically, the biology of trauma, and it can be little t trauma, big T trauma, the biology of how the body navigates pain is when we have a painful situation. The way the brain stores painful situations, traumatic situations, is that it remembers the emotion of it. Implicit memory is what this is called. What the brain doesn't so much hold on to is explicit memory, which means, I'll use myself as an example. I was adopted, given up, five months old, adopted by a wonderfully loving Christian white family in a very small town up in the Northwest, Lyndon, Washington, if you've ever heard of it. And I experienced many times, over and over, this experience of abandonment. Now, how many times was I actually abandoned in those thousands of moments throughout my life? I don't have percentages for you, but I imagine that a lot of times I wasn't actually being abandoned. There was that initial abandonment moment when I actually was given up by my birth mother. And there could have been times of abandonment here and there, let's say. But what happens is these experiences happen to us and we develop a lens, a cognitive bias. We are biased to see a certain narrative, a certain story. And my story was one of abandonment. And I saw abandonment at every turn. I was always in front of abandonment in my early dating years, in my 20s, 30s, where at the first sign of trouble, it would be, I'll leave you before you leave me. It's very protective. I once had an ex or partner at the time say to me, you don't have abandonment issues. You're the one who's always leaving other people first. You don't have abandonment issues. And I thought that was such an interesting take. But this emotional attunement where I had this sense that I was going to be abandoned at every turn. What did that result in? It resulted in me staying small. It resulted in me suppressing emotions. I had big emotions. I had anger. Anger is something I have navigated my whole life. And now, at 53, almost 54 years old, I have a good handle on my anger, but being triggered and having an anger response is something that I will always navigate for the rest of my life. That's not indicative of healing. Healing is what I do after that initial activation, that trigger of anger starts. What do I do with it after? And that's the essence of healing. But I don't want to tangent off on that too much. When we talk about emotional attunement, I had all this anger. I had all these big feelings. And when I turned to the caregivers in my life, they were equally confused. They didn't know what to do with it. So they did what they could They did their best. There was a lot of religion. There was a lot of hugging. There was this and that, but there wasn't emotional attunement. How do you feel about that? Being able to express it, being told that my feelings were normal, that it's okay, being able to walk through what it means to maybe see the situation in a different way. Maybe I wasn't being abandoned by that friend that I was crying about in second grade. Having emotional attunement is such a foundational piece of growing up when we're in those formative years, because it tells us that we are not broken. And when we don't have that experience of emotional attunement, we grow up inevitably thinking, well, everyone else seems to be fine with their feelings. Why am I having a problem with my feelings? And so we get very creative in our coping mechanisms. Expert coping mechanisms come out of childhood. Coping mechanism number 1, shutdown, my personal favorite, where any sign of trouble, you shut down, you get quiet, you get small, and you walk out of the room. You walk out of the room with a lot of anger, but you were taught that anger's not to be expressed, so you have to go somewhere with it, so I'm going to go out of the room with this anger. Another response could be going into the fire. I don't want to say clingy, but more, this shows up more in anxious attachment, anxious preoccupied to be specific, attachment style, where when there's conflict, you want to resolve it right away. Don't walk out of the room on me. Let's just talk it out. Why is it so hard to talk about feelings? Just talk about your feelings. It's no big deal. I don't see why I'm not threatening. You could say whatever you want, but they need that constant connection. They need that physical proximity. And when they don't have that proximity and someone walks out of the room, it's just the most gutting thing in the world. So emotional attunement, it shows up in our response to it as adults. It's predicated on various starts in life, but the heart of it, if you go down to the root of it, eventually, when you get to the root of self-esteem, we're talking about a lack of emotional attunement. When you got the message that I don't matter. That's why that question, the litmus for self-esteem, is what happens inside of you when something goes wrong? Do you believe that, I'm not good enough? I'll never be good enough. I'm not successful. I'm a bad person. I'm not a nice person. I'm a bad person. I'm not good. All of it. Is that what happens to you when something goes wrong? Or do you have some sense of self that you can be resilient and say, you know what? I had a bad day. You know what? This particular situation was really upsetting. But it doesn't mean that I'm a piece of dirt. So this whole question of where does self-esteem come from? How do we work on self-esteem? With my private clients, I talk to people all day long where money is not an issue. And a lot of times people are scurrying, understandably so. I like a good hustle. I get it. People are hustling and scurrying and trying to survive. And like Maslow's hierarchy, you work harder and harder to take care of basic needs. And then you start to move up, like, okay, basic needs are taken care of. Now you start moving up the pyramid and you start getting into relationships, friendships. Then you start moving farther up the pyramid and you get to sense of self-esteem. And then at the top of the pyramid is self-actualization, when people start asking the more existential questions of life. But you're not going to ask the existential questions of life if you are worrying about where your next meal will come from. The fuel to anxiety's fire is the belief that I'm not capable. Disaster will happen, and I won't be able to handle it. So why do we catastrophize? Catastrophizing is so appealing. Why? It gives you the sense that you're in control. I'm going to map out every possible way the other shoe can drop so that I won't be surprised. I have control of this situation. Another motivator is that if that painful catastrophizing event actually happens, I'll be prepared for it. I was expecting it, and thus it will cause less pain. If I don't catastrophize, here's a third reason that it's so motivating. If I don't catastrophize, I won't be motivated. If I think about all the ways that I'll fail, then I'll be successful. It's why I've been successful thus far, is because I catastrophize. So I'm not going to give it up. Everything that we do is beneficial. The number one job of the brain is to survive. So everything you do in life has some benefit. I don't care if it's addiction. I don't care if it's Catastrophizing, anxiety, whatever it is, this is your coping mechanism. It is very protective. And we don't want to just strip away that protection without having something like a better coping mechanism in place and ready to go. It'll be too destabilizing. So let's get back to catastrophizing and anxiety and putting things off. If there's nothing inside of you to soften that blow of disappointment, your nervous system will do whatever it needs to do to avoid that situation. So avoidance makes sense when the alternative is, oh, I'm going to go towards this task that is going to threaten my whole sense of self, that's going to threaten my fundamental self-esteem, even though my self-esteem is built on a house of cards. Like you take a deck of cards and build a house. I don't know if any of you ever did that when you were young. Even though my sense of self is kind of built on this house of cards, let's not blow on the house of cards. It might topple over. Avoidance of conversations, things you want to improve in life, pursuing a dream. It makes sense that you avoid when the other choice is, oh, I'm going to do that thing and now test my sense of self, test my worthiness in this world, test my lovability if I'm going to have that big talk with my spouse. No thanks, I'm not going to do that. When we talk about emotional attunement and self-esteem, some people learned early that feelings could be met, could be attuned to, and feelings could be stayed with, like it's safe to stay with feelings, even if they're upsetting feelings. Others learned that their feelings were ignored, neglected, maybe not malicious neglect, minimized, or overwhelming to others. You're too much, like, calm down. So in those situations where your feelings were ignored, neglected, minimized, or overwhelming to others, you adjusted. You adapted. A human's capacity to adapt is enormous. It's amazing the ways that we adapt and attune. And when we talk about attunement just in general, growing up, we have to attune to whatever happened in the home. You do not have choices when you're growing up. You're not going to run away. A lot of children try. And if a child is running away, it's a very serious situation. You're not going to run away. You can try, but you're going to be chased down. You have no choice. A human, once again, the number one job of the brain is to survive. A human, if they are in excruciatingly painful situations at home, a child, a little human being, will do whatever it has to do to adapt. What they see go on in the home is considered love. Good or bad, whatever happened, that is love. That is your actual love language that you started out with. So the way that we learn to adapt and attune when we're young is we stay quiet, we stay agreeable, we stay busy maybe, we stay in our head. We just don't stay in the world out here, we stay in here. You know, one of the ways that ADHD gets formed is you kind of tune into reality and then you tune out. You tune in and then you tune out. You tune in, it's too much, so I'm going to tune out. And you just learn this pattern of just like staying disconnected from reality too long. Not a lot of stamina with staying in reality. You got to pull back because it's too painful. So other examples of the ways that children attune so beautifully to their painful surroundings is staying productive, maybe cleaning the house, maybe people pleasing, playing mediator for your parents, paying the bills, you know, oldest children or just children in general of immigrant parents. You had a lot of adult responsibilities as a child that was just directly tied to survival. We need to survive in this country. These are all important survival strategies. And the starting point for today, if you're just beginning to look at this sort of stuff, is to have some appreciation for your ability to adapt. And whatever coping mechanism you ended up with, or coping mechanisms that you developed, have some appreciation at the start for why they got seeded and how they got you through some very difficult, painful, challenging years. You are resilient, you're adaptable. And today, if you're starting this work and you want to start to move out of these old patterns, this old conditioning, great. Research shows that your brain is completely capable of this. You're very good at survival strategies, but the problem is survival strategies don't build self-esteem. They're very protective, right? They're survival strategies. You're surviving and you do it very well. But now you want to thrive as an adult. You want to get out of the old Fort Knox and you want to actually peek your head out, look around, have the sunlight shine down on some of the pain and the shame that you carry with you and see what happens, see what unfolds, see what happens with your self-esteem and your sense of self. Another aspect where procrastination shows up that isn't so much called out is in relationships. So this could be considered relational procrastination. Examples of this are, like I said earlier, putting off a big talk, waiting until things feel bad enough to justify speaking. A lot of times people who are very jokey and happy-go-lucky and uber positive are the ones who generally have the most anger percolating. And it'll just take a bad day or a string of bad days until you start to see that anger come out. A lot of times people in those positions don't feel justified in just expressing needs, but they wait until they get really angry. And then that anger, when it gets to a certain point, that's a signal to them that, oh, now I'm justified to finally say something. I shut my mouth and I did not say anything for however many weeks or years, but now this issue has become so bad I've given you the benefit of the doubt and I've suppressed and I've sacrificed and I've been so good about not burdening you with my needs. But now this has gotten so bad and I'm so angry. This is a justification for me to be able to express my needs. And so some people will not express their needs unless they're angry, because then they finally get that sense of like, okay, now it's okay. It's justified. Another example of procrastination in relationships is convincing yourself it's not a big deal. Keeping yourself small, walking on eggshells around your partner. Ooh, I'd say that, but I just know they're going to blow up or get upset. And then now we're just in another cycle of not talking to each other for another couple of days. I don't really want to deal with that, so I'm not going to say anything. Another example of procrastination in relationships, staying silent to preserve connection. Kind of this on the similar wavelength as convincing yourself it's not a big deal. But this staying silent to preserve connection is more of a shutdowner type of thing. The stonewallers of the world, the people who give silent treatment to give a big message. And you're staying silent, yes, to avoid the fight. But if we get back to implicit memory, where you have decades of staying silent, when you get triggered and activated and you feel all that rage boil up, it's not just that one incident from the current moment that is the fuel behind that rage. It's decades of similar experiences through that cognitive bias, similar experiences that lead to this rage. So for people who say that I'm just the type who likes to move on and move forward, it's better that way. Biology says it's not better that way. The way your brain stores memory, implicit memory, it all comes back at that one moment. That's the essence of a trigger, is the explosion of decades of implicit memory, where all you remember is thousands of experiences of abandonment, thousands of experiences of disrespect, of being abandoned, of people not caring about you, of you not being good enough. And it culminates in these moments where we're triggered. And then who's around for us to express this upset? Oh, our partner. And so we think that in that moment, our partner is responsible for all the charge of what we're feeling. But that's not true. The majority of it is all the decades of where we were feeling this. Sure, a certain amount that your partner's not an angel. So a certain amount in the current moment is attributed to your partner. But let's just call it 25%, 30%. 75% of it, of the charge of that trigger, is what has happened in the past. For the people who shut down, and like I said, I relate to this very personally because shutdown, suppressing, dissociation, disconnection, to me felt safer to preserve relationships. It sounds weird, but shutting down, staying silent, preserved relationships in my mind, in my child's mind. So that's how I learned to approach conflict and upsets and anger, is shut down in front of everyone else. I'll have my own little tantrum off in the corner, and express rage and anger in a safe place. And safe place usually meant when I was alone. If you don't trust yourself to survive conflict or confrontation, silence definitely feels safer. So a lot of times partners will interpret silence and shutdown as aggressive. You're purposely shutting down because you know it'll hurt me. Part of that could be true, but it's not such an intentional, I know the way to hurt you most, and that is to shut down on you. Some of it is that, but a lot of it is, I don't think or know, I don't know if I'm going to survive this conflict. I'm going to freeze or shut down or flee, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, until silence feels safer. So really, what this boils down to is a self-trust problem. Do you trust yourself in conflict? Do you trust that others will stay in the relationship, friendship, family relationship, romantic relationship, if you are your, as they say, authentic self? Now, if we start moving towards, okay, great, we have all this new self-awareness. What do we do with this? I want to stop procrastinating. How do I do it? How do I stop procrastinating today? Inside alone does not fix this. On my social media, earlier in my social media, it was more about self-awareness. And those posts were very popular with people. And I could tell that over time, people started having more self-awareness. That was their starting point of followers that I would get, is people who had read a lot of books, done a lot of therapy, had a lot of self-work. They knew themselves inside and out. But yet they still have these problem areas where I know why, once again, I'll use myself as an example. I know why I get angry. I know why I feel abandonment. I know why I'm triggered, but I'm still doing the old thing. I still can't get out of this cycle of the behavioral part. Cognitively, I know what's going on. Behaviorally, I'm still my old self. What to do? So the reality is that you can understand yourself and have self-awareness and still avoid and still procrastinate. Self-awareness alone, insight alone, won't keep you from putting off that big talk with your spouse. Awareness doesn't give you emotional capacity. It won't give you emotional regulation. Knowing why you do something doesn't mean your body feels safe doing something else. That takes practice. That takes muscle memory. That takes getting in the lab, actually practicing, doing it. That's the toughest piece, is that final new behavioral piece. And this is just a fundamental design of the way every human being is wired, is we have a cognitive and a behavioral piece. Cognitively, if I have that big talk with my spouse, they will reject me, we might get divorced, and I don't want to do that. So behaviorally, I'm not going to have the talk. If you can work with that cognitive piece and reframe what reality might be, if I have new tools for communication, my spouse is empathetic, our talks in the past have gone well, we're working on our communication, maybe we get a couples coach or a couples therapist to help us through our communication. If you can get a reframe on having big talks with your spouse, a reframe on expressing your needs and the ability to express your needs, with the reframe, now you can more easily have the behavior that you want. And this leads me to the final aspect of procrastination and how this plays out in your life, and that is with regards to personal growth. Healing. How procrastination will show up in personal growth is, I'll work on my anger next year. It's January 1st. Maybe some of you already decided to work on your challenges. I'm going to work on my anxiety, on my anger, on my OCD. I don't know what you're working on. You know, we make these big announcements, these big decisions in our heads for, I'm going to start working on this at this time, without understanding some of the things we talked about earlier today. I'll deal with my childhood stuff eventually, or it's not that important. I'll start therapy when things calm down. I'm just too busy right now. You know, we could use couples counseling, but we also always get over it. Someone waves the white flag and we watch a movie and we generally get over our fights. So we're just kind of pushing off. That relational procrastination comes through where we push it off. And this boils down to the root fear. What is the root of it? I used to be an IT engineer and I always like getting to the root cause. The root cause is you have an identity that kept you functioning. I talked about all the wonderful ways that children cope growing up, these coping mechanisms. Part of that coping mechanism is the identity that you developed, a childhood role, if you will. You were the good child, the competent one, the smart one, the agreeable one, the self-sufficient one. Maybe you were the caretaker, the high achiever, the golden child, which is something that more, others place on you. Other roles could have been the peacemaker, the emotional one, the rebellious one, the funny one. So you have this identity growing up. And you'll notice, especially since we just have the holiday season, you'll notice that when you drop in with family again, they'll just put you into that old identity, whether you've changed or not. When I was growing up, my family went on a camping outing, and this was without my parents. My siblings decided, we want to camp. And none of them had camped before. And thus, none of them were prepared for what we needed for camping and didn't know how to cook over an open flame. Long story short, everybody got food poisoning from the sausages that we were cooking over the fire. I use the word cooking lightly. And we weren't warm enough when we were sleeping. The weather was cold. Half of us fought for who could sleep in the car overnight to try to stay warm. It was a disaster. And my parents rolled up to the campsite the next morning because they didn't want to camp. They were the smart ones. And they just got such a chuckle out of all of us kids who were just so adamant about wanting to go camping. And so when I got into my 20s and even some into my 30s, I started camping with friends, with my partner. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed hiking and camping. And my mother just could not accept it. Oh, you hate camping. And then she would have to recount that story. Remember when you went camping and you got sick from that sausage? And she'd have a good old laugh. It's hard to get out of these fundamental identities that get set when we're younger. And just to indicate how strongly these identities get set, if you're going to mess with this fundamental identity, personal growth means you're no longer going to be that fundamental identity. So thus, the identity that kept you functioning and getting along with family, belonging in family, getting along, surviving your childhood, getting along with that challenging parent, that abusive parent. If you're going to change that identity that helped you survive that, growth, personal growth to not be this identity is going to be so threatening. So threatening. You're threatening the identity that kept you functioning. That's a huge undertaking. This is why people don't really, I'm not going to say they don't want to grow, but it's just so vulnerable and so exposing and so scary to become a different person. It's so scary to even entertain the idea that my parent has some real challenges that led them to treat me and or my siblings in a really egregious way. I still love my parent, and I was really affected by my parent. This ability to hold competing emotions will allow you to start to process your childhood. If you can't hold competing emotions, you will not process your childhood ever. And it'll be something that will never quite fit in who you are today. It'll be something that just eats at you. It's something that just doesn't quite sit well. Because a lot of times people get into this all or nothing black and white thinking of I have to have one view of my parent or the other view. And if I have this other view of saying that my parent affected me, no. Now we're going to mess with that whole fundamental identity, this worldview. I can't handle that. I'm not going to do it. I had a good childhood. And people mistakenly think that they have to choose one or the other. And the secret to really processing your past is being able to sustain and have stamina for holding competing emotions. So what we're talking about when we talk about changing self-esteem, changing our sense of self, when you step out of this shell of, I am an angry person. Oh, wait, maybe I'm not an angry person. Now what? Oh, I'm the strong, silent type. I'm a shutdowner. People expect this of me. It's part of my identity. It helped me get along with my parents. It kept the family together. All these family roles, these childhood roles we had, they're like little job descriptions in the family corporation. And if you don't show up for that job description, what happens to the family? So many things are on the line. So when we're talking about changing this identity of who you are as a person, maybe you're, sure, anxious, but now you're not as anxious. Maybe you're not as angry. Maybe you start to heal your childhood. It's going to feel good. It's going to feel liberating. It's going to feel healing. And it's going to feel scary. And that's okay. When something helped you survive, letting go of it does not feel like rainbows and unicorns. It doesn't feel like growth. It feels like risk. And know that going in, when you start to take any sort of major undertaking of really becoming the person that you want to be, just know that letting go of these old identities, letting go of these old patterns, these old habits, these old coping mechanisms that are just so protective, so therapeutic, so comforting, so soothing, so pacifying. Letting go of that, it feels so risky. And that's why progress can be a little bit slow. And again, that's okay. We can't just let go of a coping mechanism without having something else to replace it. So what you do is you work on replacing that new coping mechanism, shoring that up, while still having the old coping mechanism. And one day, the tide will turn and the balance will shift, where the old mechanism no longer holds more weight than the new coping mechanism. And you'll start to really shift into a new way of being and a new fundamental identity. What actually changes procrastination? Change starts when emotional capacity increases, for one. Emotional capacity, emotional regulation. When you can stay with discomfort without attacking yourself, without going down to that hole of, I'm not good enough, I'm just hopeless, I need to give up, and you just cling to that old fundamental identity. So staying with discomfort without attacking yourself. When you don't abandon yourself at the first sign of shame, first sign of trouble, first sign of, uh-oh, am I going to be abandoned? If I change myself, is this meaningful person in my life going to look at me differently? Is our friendship going to survive? Is our marriage going to survive? That's a big question. Here are some questions that can help you in navigating your relationship with procrastination and self-esteem, all of it. Is, what are you avoiding that feels heavier than it should? What are you avoiding that feels heavier than it should? What conversation keeps getting delayed because you don't trust yourself to handle it? Sure, maybe you also don't trust the other person to handle it, but primarily, what's getting delayed because you don't trust yourself to handle it? What task, if we talk about back to more traditional procrastination, what task carries more emotional weight than practical difficulty? Like if you look at the task itself, oh, I need to start writing this draft for my first book. Well, the practicality of that is pretty simple. Sit down and start writing, right? But if it carries emotional weight, if we're now talking about my whole sense of self is riding on this book, my self-esteem, who am I as a person? Am I worthy? Am I valuable? Am I going to be up for criticism? All of it, all the scary things, all coming out of basically a childhood where I didn't have emotional attunement and consoling and soothing to walk me through these kinds of situations. And also, finally, what new behaviors will mess with your identity? I was a blackout drinker for many years and had, I'm sure, quite a reputation in Seattle with the scene that I ran in of being a train wreck. And when I thought about not drinking, it's such a huge change to my identity. Once again, that fundamental identity, what helps you belong. It helped me belong in all the friends and the circles that I ran in at that time. And so if I'm going to change a behavior to not drinking or drinking less, now what's going to happen? People are going to look at me weird for not drinking. People are going to become uncomfortable for not drinking. People won't want to hang out with me because we're not having fun and drinking. And that's just a simple example of cutting back on drinking. What will I be like if I'm not drinking? I won't be as fun. I won't be as entertaining. People won't want to hang around with me. People will find me boring. I feel more confident socially when I'm drinking. All of these things. So new behaviors, ask how it's going to mess with your current identity. So I want to leave you with just one thought as we close today, and that is pay attention to what you avoid. Get really honest with yourself about what you're avoiding. Try not to rationalize it. We all have our excellent reasons for why we're avoiding certain things, but pay attention to what you avoid. At least just acknowledge it. You can do this privately. Just acknowledge what you're avoiding. And just know that what you're avoiding is usually protecting something very important. What are you protecting? Thank you for joining me today on Engineering Love, and we're back for season 2, and I look forward to talking to you next week.